If you spend enough time on YouTube, watching financial influencers, or even scrolling through legacy media headlines, you'll notice a pattern that the thumbnails screaming top 5 buy and hold forever stocks or stocks to hold for life. But the irony is, when you actually click in, the very same people admit there is no such thing as a guaranteed long term. One video sells you the hope with 10 forever stocks, and the next quietly contradicts it. It is pitched as the simplest path to wealth. The logic sounds flawless. Markets are volatile in the short run, but in the long run, they always trend upward. So if you can just control your emotions and stay invested, you'll supposedly enjoy average returns of 12% per year without needing to know much about stock picking. Sounds perfect, right? Too perfect. You'll be sipping pina coladas in Goa and your stocks will keep winning marathons for you. So in this video, let's break down the truth behind the buy and hold and why it looks safer than it is, and how survivorship bias and what lessons we can really take away as retail investors. Chapter 1. Survivorship bias. So what exactly explains this contradiction? Why do you see flashy thumbnails promising forever stocks, yet in reality very few survive the long term? Because here's the catch. Those returns you keep hearing about aren't from the average stock. They are from the index, and the index has a secret superpower that it quietly removes the losers. Yes Bank gone, Suzlon forgotten, Reliance Power vanished. The index survives by throwing bad businesses into the graveyard, but as an individual investor, if you had bought and held those exact stocks, you wouldn't be compounding wealth, you would be compounding losses. Now that is called survivorship bias. We celebrate the handful of companies that become giants while ignoring the dozens that collapsed along the way. And the numbers don't lie. A 2024 study of nearly 5,000 Indian stocks found that only about 35% beat the equivalent of a short-term treasury bill over lifetimes, and just 37 companies drove 50% of all market gains. On the index front, survivorship bias skews performance upward by around 2 to 4% annually, depending upon your strategy. In other words, buy and hold in India rarely refers to the average stock. It's a strategy that only works if you hold one of the fortunate few. While you look at the Nifty 50 chart over 20 years, it looks like an escalator that only goes up. What you don't see is the graveyard of companies that fell off that escalator. Time is often regarded as the best healer, but unfortunately, this doesn't apply to stock markets. It doesn't turn a weak business into a strong one. In fact, time does the opposite. It amplifies whatever you bought in the first place. If it's a Titan or an Asian Paints, compounding works in your favor. Which brings us to the next truth that often gets overlooked. Time is not a safety net, it's a magnifying glass. Chapter 2. Time as an amplifier, not a healer. If survivorship bias is the illusion in market history, then time as an amplifier is the reality of compounding in practice. Survivorship bias explains why we only see the winners in hindsight, but time as an amplifier explains what actually happens when you hold a business for decades. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Time does not reduce your risk, it magnifies the quality of whatever you bought. If you're holding a great business, time will make you wealthy. If you're holding a weak or a deteriorating business, time will quietly destroy your wealth. Take the Titan company. 20 years ago, many investors dismissed it as a small watchmaker. In 2003, its market cap was less than 1,000 crore. Today, it's valued above 3.5 lakh crores, powered by jewelry, eyewear, and a brand that dominates consumer trust. Investors, when held Titan, saw time amplify every aspect of its quality, strong consumer demand, efficient management, and brand power into one of the biggest compounding stories within Indian markets. Now compare that with MTNL. Once a monopoly in Delhi and Mumbai, it looked like the safe long-term bet in the telecom boom of the 1990s, but poor management, lack of innovation, and competition from private players eroded its business year after year. A 1 lakh rupee investment in MTNL and its 2008 peak is worth barely 2,000 today. Time didn't heal, it magnified the weaknesses until almost nothing remained. Or look at Infosys versus Satyam Computers. Both were seen as leaders in India's IT story during the 2000s. Infosys compounded steadily because of governance, execution, and client trust. Satyam, despite looking like a blue chip, collapsed in the 2009 accounting scandal. Investors who held Infosys were rewarded by time, while Satyam holders saw their long-term dreams vanish overnight. The lesson is simple. Time behaves like a magnifying glass. It zooms in on the real quality of what you hold. With Titan or Infosys, every year adds in the compounding machine. With MTNL or Satyam, every year exposes more weaknesses more brutally. So while survivorship bias hides the failures of the past, time as an amplifier shows the brutal mechanics of the present. Buy and hold is not a blanket formula. It only works if you start with something worth holding. Now coming to chapter 3, stories versus statistics. We have seen how survivorship bias distorts the past and how time amplifies whatever you own in the present. But why do so many investors still fail for the idea of buy and hold stocks? The answer is in how our brains are wired. An ace investor, Davina Mehra, often points out humans don't respond to statistics, they respond to stories. A percentage of probability rarely moves us, but a vivid story with a face and emotion attached to it captures our full attention. Think about it. If I told you that 40% of rural households lack access to basic sanitation, most people would shrug and move on. But if I showed you a scene like in the film of Sudesh, when Shah Rukh Khan visits a home with no electricity, no running water, and barely enough food, you would feel the weight of that problem immediately. If someone asked you to pay for a donation right away, the chances are you would give. That's the power of a story. Now bring this back to the stock market. Investors are constantly sold stories about certain companies. This is the next HDFC Bank, this is India's Tesla, this company will ride the EV wave. These stories are vivid, exciting and easy to picture, and so they spread like wildfire. But the statistics, the hard data often tell a different story. If you look at the numbers, very few companies actually sustain high returns for decades. Most fade away, yet we ignore the statistics and cling to the stories because that is how our brains are built. And this is where the real danger lies. Stories makes us forget probabilities. We hear about the Asian Paints or Titan, but not the dozens of others that failed along the way. Stories make us believe that if we just find the next big one, we can hold it forever. Statistics remind us that the odds are stacked against the outcome. The real lesson, always zoom out. Stories may inspire us, but statistics reveal the truth. To survive in the market, you must train yourself to look at the bigger picture, to see from the bird's eye view and not just the close-up story you are being sold. Now coming to chapter 4, where does buy and hold actually work? So far we have seen how survivorship bias creates illusion in market history and how time acts as an amplifier, magnifying the true quality of what you own, but that still leaves one important question. If buy and hold doesn't work for most individual stocks, then where does it actually work in the stock market? The answer is simple: indexes. When you look at the long-term charts of Sensex or Nifty 50, the past story looks beautiful. Over the past 25 years, the Sensex has multiplied wealth more than 15 times. The Nifty 50 has delivered annualized returns of around 12 to 13%. The lines move up and to the right almost like an escalator. But here's the truth behind that smooth chart. Indexes survive because they're designed to survive. They're not fixed lists of companies, they are dynamic portfolios that are constantly evolving. The weak players get thrown out, the new winners get added. This constant pruning is what gives the illusion of steady, uninterrupted compounding. Take the Nifty 50 in the year 2000. Back then, the index included companies like Ranbaxy, Reliance Petroleum, and Z Telefilms. At the time, all of them looked like future champions. Fast forward to today, and most of these names have either collapsed, stagnated, or disappeared completely. But here is what makes the index powerful. When Satyam imploded in the 2009 accounting scandal, it was quickly replaced by Infosys and TCS. When Ranbaxy struggled and was acquired, it was replaced by a stronger pharmaceutical player. When MTNL turned into a shell of its former self, it was dropped and the slot went to an emerging sector leader. Today's Nifty 50 is filled with companies like Asian Paints, Titan, Bajaj Finance, HDFC Bank and Infosys, names that have actually compounded wealth. So when you look at the 20-year chart of the Nifty, you're looking at 50 companies that survived and thrived for 2 decades. You're looking at a list that kept updating itself, hiding the graveyard of failures, and that is why the index looks like the compounding magic while individual stock charts often look like a heartbreak. And this is exactly where retail investors fall into a trap. They hear that buy and hold always works in the long term and assume that means that the same thing or whichever stock they buy. But there is a crucial difference. The Nifty throws out its losers, your portfolio doesn't. If you bought MTNL 2000, you're still holding MTNL today. The index moved on, you didn't. This is why buy and hold as a philosophy really only works when you are holding an index fund or an ETF. The index is quietly doing the hard work of filtering, replacing and rebalancing for you. With individual stocks, there is no such safety net. When the business model cracks, when competition catches up, or when management loses its way, the decline compounds just as powerfully as the growth of a Titan or an Asian Paints. So the next time you see a Sensex chart that makes buy in stock hold look like the easiest strategy in the world, remember this: the chart you're seeing is not the story of 30 or 50 companies that stood the test of time. It's the story of constant evolution, of pruning out the weak and rewarding the strong. Buy and hold works for indexes because indexes are built to survive, but applying that same logic blindly to individual stocks is a mistake and has cost investors fortunes. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching the video till the end. Do tell us in the comments what you thought about this, any feedback that you might have. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel.